falsehoods, that he inherited empty cupboards of supplies from the strategic stockpile. Now, that stockpile had been depleted by previous administrations, and Trump's administration was warned multiple times to replenish it, but he ignored those warnings. He also claimed governors were getting everything they need from the federal government. That is not true. Governors in Washington State, Colorado, Michigan, Illinois say they need more supplies from the federal government. Health workers are not getting the supplies they need. That's not true. Ours is sadly one of the highest in the world. Those falsehoods are bad, but worse, he offered no clear updates on the state of the virus or vaccine, only saying, we'll end up with a cure, we'll end up with therapeutics, we'll end up with a vaccine very soon or 3. This is when an epidemiologist could have come in handy. But most chillingly, Trump said that his administration is in the process of developing a strategy to combat the virus, which is developed as we go along. Now, 6 months later, now you're in the process of developing a strategy? 142,000 dead Americans, and now you're starting to strategize? That it has taken this long to tell the American people that the President of the United States is working on a plan to defeat this is unconscionable. The enduring negligence and denial of this president about this pandemic will be his ultimate legacy. So to recap, the briefing didn't really brief us about much. It perpetuated a whole bunch of dangerous and costly falsehoods that have helped us get to where we are today. It revealed Trump's stunning lack of preparedness and acceptance of reality on this virus. And it shows we're no closer to an end to this than we were 6 months ago. So I'm not seeing the cost-benefit analysis of bringing back the briefings. That was a total waste of time, ours and his. Oh yes, and before I forget, Trump also decided to respond to a question about Ghislaine Maxwell, the Jeffrey Epstein confidant charged with recruiting, grooming, and ultimately sexually abusing minors as young as 14 by saying, I wish her well. That is all. I have nothing.
Weapons restrictions lifted.
Senator Ted Cruz gave it a hell no, not just a no. Senator Rand Paul said it was insane. Republicans publicly airing their grievances about critical parts of a new stimulus bill. As congressional correspondent Phil Mattingly explains, the GOP disagreements could turn into a disaster for millions of Americans who are now in jeopardy.
As Congress sprints to pass another massive emergency coronavirus relief bill, the fight isn't Republican versus Democrat.
I asked my Republican colleagues, what in the hell are we doing?
For now, it's Republicans against themselves. A raucous, closed-door Senate Republican lunch on Tuesday laying bare a series of divides between President Trump and the GOP.
There are some differences of opinion on the question of the payroll tax cut and whether that's the best way to go.
And between Senate Republicans and Senate Republicans.
A number of senators at lunch get up and say, well, gosh, we need $20 billion for this, we need $100 billion for this, and they're just really eager to spend it. I'm like, what are you guys doing?
Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell attempting to thread the needle over internal concerns about spending, and the White House push on a series of priorities Republicans simply don't back.
The legislation that I've begun to sketch out is neither another CARES Act that floats the entire economy, nor a typical stimulus bill for a nation that's ready to get back to normal. Our country is in a complex middle ground between those two things.
Republicans planning a $1 trillion proposal with $105 billion for schools, but rejecting the idea of explicitly tying all those funds to reopening, a key Trump ask. Another round of stimulus checks to Americans, but wary of Trump's push for a payroll tax cut. A push to increase funds for state grants to increase testing, and new money for the CDC and NIH. Despite the administration's insistence, there is still money available and more isn't necessary. And as millions of Americans face losing $600 in federal unemployment benefits at the end of this month, the biggest unanswered question, how to restructure the program amid GOP opposition. McConnell, however, making clear his conference and the White House will unify.
I'm going to introduce a bill in the next few days that is a starting place, that enjoys fairly significant support among Republican senators, probably not everyone.
For Democratic leaders unified behind their own $3 trillion proposal passed by the House in May, a waiting game.
The time is so important, and the sooner we can see their bill, the sooner we can understand our differences more clearly or our similarities.
And then start negotiating.
And this sharp critique.
One thing is very clear, we have been united in our priorities. I think their delay is their disarray.
Bill Mattingly, CNN, Capitol Hill.
Joining us now, Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat of New York. Senator, thanks so much for joining us. So the unemployment rate is 11%, and at the end of this month, as you know, the extra money in unemployment insurance that had been provided from previous stimulus bills, that runs out. What is your message to Americans who don't know how they're going to be able to afford food or rent next month?
Well, you're right, Jake. We have a whole bunch of cliffs that we're up against. Unemployment insurance runs out. Tomorrow, rental assistance runs out. Millions, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands could be thrown out of their homes. State and local governments have another deadline on August 1st where they don't have enough money and they're going to lay off tens of thousands of more people. And why did this happen? Just what you said. Because our Republican colleagues are just dithering. They're divided. They don't talk to each other. They spend more time talking about getting rid of statues or not getting rid of statues than about the greatest economic crisis we've had in 75 years, the greatest health crisis in 100 years. They're it's pathetic. McConnell went to the floor today and gave a speech. He talked about the New York Times having a writer leaving them, about the cancel culture, not one mention of COVID when we're in such a great crisis. What they have to do is get their act together. The president, the Senate Republicans got to get together and present us with something. We told Treasury Secretary Mnuchin and Chief of Staff Meadows yesterday, Nancy and I, Speaker Pelosi and I, give us a concrete plan in writing and then we can start negotiating. They haven't been able to do it. You can't negotiate with thin air.
There's a big debate right now about opening schools, and frankly, it's a horrible Hobbesian choice. Remote learning is awful. It causes problems. It forces working people to have to choose between childcare and employment. On the other hand, opening the schools poses serious health risks to students, to teachers, and to spreading throughout the community. What do you tell your constituents about this problem that frankly, their government has not been able to solve?
Yeah, we Democrats have had a solution for weeks. And it's very simple. Everyone wants the schools to open, but only if they open safely. And their schools can do that if they have the resources. I spoke to a school district in upstate New York. They have 4,000 students, 500 faculty. If they need a mask every day, that alone, and that's what the experts say, a new mask every day, that alone is hundreds of thousands of dollars. They have to change their bus routes. They can't have the kids sitting right next to each other, so you have to double the bus routes. A lot of the schools want to change their gymnasiums and cafeterias into classrooms. They can do this all with money and open up safely. But again, we've had a plan. We've asked our Republican colleagues to give us a counter plan. They say nothing. And this is what the frustration is. We are frustrated because there are so many people hurting in such a great crisis, and we're willing to sit down and talk with them and negotiate, and they can't come back with any answers. The party is divided. Donald Trump, they know, doesn't know what the heck he's doing. They know in their hearts he's responsible for this crisis in a lot of different ways, and yet they can't break from him. So he says 2 days ago, amazingly, no more money for testing. Testing is a key. It's one of the reasons the European countries and the Eastern Asian countries are so far ahead of us, which we should be ashamed of because we had the best healthcare system in the country. But the president wants to eliminate testing. The Republicans are afraid to say no to him. We can't eliminate testing money.
Yeah.
It's a key. It's the frustration. So forget me. How about all the people who will be thrown out of their houses, who will not get unemployment, not be able to feed their families? We're waiting for some concrete proposals. The sooner, the better, and we'll roll up our sleeves and sit down and negotiate.
So you and Speaker Pelosi met with Treasury Secretary Mnuchin as well as Chief of Staff Meadows. Mnuchin has said he thinks that there could be a deal by the end of next week. Is that possible?
Well, you know, if they can get us a concrete plan, we told them very explicitly, you can't just talk in generalities. You can't negotiate in thin air. And we told him, come up with a bill. We've had a bill for 2 months that the House passed, that Senate Democrats fully support, that deals with all of these things in terms of unemployment, in terms of people being thrown out of the houses, in terms of state and local governments, in terms of opening up schools. Come back with your alternative. And they're so divided among each other. I have never seen a more dysfunctional party in a time of crisis than this Republican Party. And part of the blame is Trump, but part of the blame is the Republican senators who, when they know he's wrong, they know he's off base, they're afraid to refute him. And now he's coming back on the air. I worry what he's going to say. He could disrupt things once again. You know, anytime President Trump goes before the public, could be another public health crisis. Who knows what he'll call for?
All right, Senator Chuck Schumer, Democratic Minority Leader of the U.S. Senate. Thank you so much. Appreciate your time, sir.
Our frustration because people are suffering and we want to get something done, but we can't do it when there's a Senate Republican control and a president who's a Republican and won't come to negotiate with us. It's terrible.
In our politics lead now, even some Trump-supporting Republicans expressed outrage yesterday when President Trump extended well wishes to Ghislaine Maxwell. Maxwell's been charged with conspiring with the now dead pedophile Jeffrey Epstein to sexually abuse teenage girls. Trump and Maxwell have been photographed together, but in an interview with CNN, another former Epstein business partner said that the two knew each other well, as CNN's Pamela Brown reports for us now.
President Trump's return to the briefing room took an unexpected turn with his response to a question about Ghislaine Maxwell. Arrested earlier this month on multiple charges related to sexual abuse of underage girls by her longtime companion, convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. She has pleaded not guilty.
I haven't really been following it too much. I just wish her well, frankly.
The warm wishes for Maxwell are bringing renewed scrutiny to Trump's relationship with her and Epstein, who government officials say died by suicide in his jail cell last year after being charged with sex trafficking. Some Republican lawmakers reacted to Trump's comments on Twitter, saying, "This is unacceptably obtuse for a woman accused of the most morally depraved of crimes. And she is despicable, and he needs to say that."
I've met her numerous times over the years, especially since I lived in Palm Beach, and I guess they lived in Palm Beach. But I wish her well, whatever it is.
Trump says he's known Epstein since the late 80s, and pictures from the 90s show the president with Maxwell, who became Epstein's girlfriend, associate, and allegedly his madam. One picture shows Trump with Maxwell in 1997, then again in early 2000 at Trump's Palm Beach property, Mar-a-Lago, with his wife, Melania, and Epstein. Another picture shows Trump with Maxwell that same year at a New York fashion show, and then again with model Naomi Campbell. Epstein's one-time business partner, Stephen Hoffenberg, who spent 18 years in jail for a Ponzi scheme, told CNN today, "There's no dispute. They knew each other well," adding, "He liked her and she liked him." In a 2002 interview with New York Magazine, Trump showered praise on Epstein, calling him a, quote, "terrific guy," and saying he's a lot of fun to be with. It is even said he likes beautiful women as much as I do, and many of them are on the younger side. After Epstein was arrested last year, Trump had a different tune, claiming he kicked Epstein out of Mar-a-Lago years before.
He was a fixture in Palm Beach. I had a falling out with him a long time ago. I don't think I've spoken to him for 15 years. I wasn't a fan.
Prosecutors say Maxwell went into hiding over the last year as more victims came forward, alleging she lured them in and groomed them to be sexually abused by Epstein. Alleged victim Virginia Giuffre has claimed Maxwell recruited her in 1999 while she was a locker room attendant at Trump's Mar-a-Lago resort, though she never alleged any wrongdoing by the president.
And Jake, the comments that the president made about Maxwell caught some White House officials off guard. Now, he is expected to brief again shortly, so we'll see if he addresses this then.
I just wanted to take a moment to highlight something President Trump said during that coronavirus briefing yesterday that has absolutely nothing to do with COVID, but everything to do with something I just want to call your attention to. He uttered these 5 little words.
I just wish her well, frankly. I've met her numerous times over the years, especially since I lived in Palm Beach, and I guess they lived in Palm Beach. But I wish her well.
I wish her well. Those seemingly warm words from the president, they were for Ghislaine Maxwell, longtime associate of accused sex trafficker Jeffrey Epstein, who was found dead in his jail cell before he could have been convicted. Now, Maxwell is facing federal charges. She is accused of recruiting, grooming, and sexually abusing young girls as part of a years-long criminal enterprise. And their stories are so abhorrent, I can't even go into some of the detail on national television. But while the President of the United States wished Ghislaine Maxwell well, he has left other incredibly important women off of his well wishes list. How about wishing well alleged victim Annie Farmer, who said, quote, "The danger Maxwell poses must be taken seriously." How about wishing well anonymous Jane Doe, who said, quote, "Without Ghislaine, Jeffrey could not have done what he did." How about wishing well Virginia Roberts Gouffre, who claims that Epstein kept her as a teenage sex slave and that he was able to keep her with the assistance of Ghislaine Maxwell? How about wishing well the women whose younger years were allegedly stolen, whose lives are forever scarred, whose futures they hope will see justice? Ghislaine Maxwell is currently being held in a federal jail without bond. She has pleaded not guilty to those charges.
Were you invited to the briefing today?
Order assigned.
I was not invited up to this point. I'm assuming that I'm not going to be there. Of course, it's going to be in just a short while, and I'm still here at the NIH, so I'm assuming.
This cycle of violence in Chicago needs to end.
They're the latest grim headlines in what's been a grim year for gun violence in the city of Chicago. At least 60 shell casings left behind as 15 people were shot at a funeral home on the city's south side. And then not long after, in a separate shooting, a 3-year-old was shot while she was in the car with her parents, who at this point are not cooperating with police.
Violence is a symptom of communities that are crying out. Young men who don't believe that they have a future other than being part of one of these gangs or factions.
The superintendent of the Chicago Police Department points to gang violence in at least this latest mass shooting.
And any day of the week, any hour of the day, several hundred gang conflicts led to that 117,000.
But another factor that can't be ignored is the ongoing coronavirus pandemic, significantly affecting the ecosystem of public safety. That includes jails, courts, community groups, and first responders, including police. Just this past weekend alone, over 60 people were shot and 12 were killed. 2020 is on pace to be one of the deadliest the city has seen in decades, with both murders and shootings up close to 50% compared to the same time last year. It's part of why the Trump administration is planning to send in additional federal resources to the city that Mayor Lightfoot says will bolster their already existing federal partnerships to suppress violent crime, based on the information she has. But as solutions are being worked out in offices, lives are continuing to be lost, and it's become a vicious, deadly cycle.
Cycle of violence in Chicago. Someone gets shot, it's from someone else to pick up a gun. This same cycle repeats itself over and over and over again.
Now, in the shooting at the funeral home, police do believe at this point that it was rival gang factions that set that off in that case, and that the person the funeral was actually for was killed in a separate drive-by shooting last week. Now, in regards to police presence, it's our understanding that those additional federal resources are not here just yet, but in the meantime, the Chicago Police Department says they are going to step up a more bolstered and strategic presence to try and stem some of this violence, as they, among others, fear what comes next in this retaliation, and this already deadly cycle just gets even deadlier.
With little more than 3 months until Election Day, President Trump is taking his law and order message to new heights. There are live pictures there, obviously, inside the White House here. He's been holding this event in just a couple minutes on this crime-fighting initiative dubbed Operation Legend. The effort involves sending federal law enforcement officers to cities across the country. And so this is happening as more than a dozen mayors have joined Portland, Oregon in asking the Trump administration to remove federal forces or stop plans to send them to these more Democratic-led cities. Our chief White House correspondent, Jim Acosta, is live in Washington. And Jim, just why is he doing this?
Well, this is part policy, part campaign strategy, Brooke. The president has been saying for weeks now that he wants to see, as he puts it, law and order imposed in cities where you see these protests sometimes turn violent. And he's about to announce in just a few moments from now an extension of what they're calling Operation Legend, which will send federal law enforcement officers into cities around the country. In this case, in this extension, we're told it's going to be sending law enforcement officers into Chicago and Albuquerque. You mentioned Portland. Obviously, that's been in the news over the last several days with those protests, resulting in some clashes with police and obviously complaints from people in that community that you have citizens who are just being swooped off the street by unnamed law enforcement officers, and it's raising all sorts of questions as to, how far can the federal government intrude in local law enforcement matters. You've seen the acting Secretary of Homeland Security saying, that he is going to send some of his officers into these communities, whether local officials like it or not. Obviously, you have mayors across the country, like Mayor Lightfoot in Chicago, who are saying, hey, wait a minute, no, we don't want President Trump's quote-unquote troops coming into our city. Of course, troops would be a different connotation altogether, but that's how it feels to mayors on the ground. I will tell you, Brooke, when the Black Lives Matter protests were happening here in Washington, we obviously saw a taste of that ourselves. We saw armored vehicles on the streets of the nation's capital. You saw officers in uniforms that weren't marked without names on the uniform and so on. And this is spread out into other cities. It's something that White House officials have been telling us the president has been eager to do. And I talked to a Trump campaign advisor who said, expect the president to continue this message right up until Election Day of talking about bringing law and order back to the streets of these major U.S. cities. Of course, you have, a lot of people in those cities saying, how far is too far? And, a debate has erupted, I think, as to what is appropriate use of force. And by the looks of a lot of these pictures, Brooke, you can tell it just looks like it's way too much. It's happening in these cities. But the president is persisting here with what is half campaign message, half policy here. And there's no sign of this stopping. If anything, it's a sign that he's going to continue to do this right up until Election Day, Brooke.
I want to get some law enforcement perspective on all of this, but Jim will stand by with you for this event there at the White House. Let me bring in CNN law enforcement analyst Charles Ramsey. He's also a former Philadelphia police commissioner, Washington, D.C., and also he's a consultant on policing reform. So, Chief, on the one hand, you heard Jim talking about how the White House sees this as, bringing law and order back to the streets. You have governors, other local officials who are comparing Trump's actions to authoritarianism. They want to stop the Trump administration from sending in these federal agents. They also claim their presence would do more harm than good. How do you see it?
Well, it depends on what he actually plans on doing, which hopefully this press conference he'll be a little more clear. If it's like in Portland, where you're sending in uniformed officers and they're engaging in actions with demonstrators, that's not helpful. And I can understand clearly how mayors would not want that to take place in their city. However, if it is in the form of beefing up existing federal task forces, like with the FBI, alcohol, tobacco, and firearms, DEA, that can be very helpful. In 2012, I believe it was, in Philadelphia, we had a real uptick in violent crime, and they had what they called a surge, which meant they sent additional agents from ATF, alcohol, tobacco, and firearms, into the city. I added some additional people into the task force. We already had an existing task force, but I beefed that up, and it did have an impact. So it depends on what it is he's actually planning on doing. And a lot of those cases then went to federal court.
You look, though, you look at certain cities where the violence, the shootings are up significantly. Take Chicago, right. Take New York, take, LA. Why is this happening?
Well, I mean, listen, I don't know why it's happening. It's probably a variety of reasons why. One, fully believes, and understandably so, that police are being less aggressive in the current environment. You also had the release of an awful lot of prisoners. I don't know if all of them came back with a straight life, or if they engaged in activities that are causing problems on the street. You got hot weather. I mean, you've got so many things coming together. Frustration around COVID. I mean, you've got a lot of things coming together. So there'll be enough people that'll be looking at this long term. But right now, it's a problem. In Chicago yesterday, mass shooting with like 14 or 15 people shot
at a funeral.
At a funeral. But that's not all that unusual, believe it or not, when you're talking about a gang funeral. I don't know if this guy was a gang member or not, but obviously somebody didn't like him. So you get those kinds of things that take place. But it can't go on. So all the help that you could possibly get, you're looking for, but not in the form of Portland. And I want to make that very clear. That is not the kind of help. In fact, it's not help. It's not what you want. It's not what you need.
Tip 1. Find a mental.
Now, from covering coronavirus to getting it. A Georgia report.
We now have a rare, honest assessment from the President of the United States. You remember, not long ago, he said the virus was dying out. Now he acknowledges things are likely to get worse before they get better. And the President now belatedly joining the call for Americans to wear masks. The President's new tone is a reflection of two sets of data. His horrible re-election polling and the brutal coronavirus reality. The United States has added 903,000 infections in just 2 weeks. That is a stunning number anyway, but all the more sobering when we remember the important lesson of the past 5 months. When case numbers rise, other sad statistics follow. And already coronavirus deaths are again rising. You see there, 1,082 reported on Tuesday, yesterday. Also up, hospitalizations, which now stand 222 shy of the pandemic peak. Some states say they have no beds and that supplies are dwindling, with cases rising and hospitals crowded. Many states and school districts now debating whether it's best to keep children at home for school, at least for a while. The CDC director this morning invoking his grandchildren and making the case he believes back to the classroom is safe for most of America.
Would you be comfortable with your school-aged grandchildren going back to school in the fall?
Absolutely. Absolutely. The only one that there may be some reservation is my grandson with cystic fibrosis, depending on how he can be accommodated in the school that he's in. But my other 10 grandchildren, of those, 8 of them are school age. I'm 100% that they can get back to school.
You're having that debate in your community. Let's catch up on where things stand today, state by state. We'll just start with the trend map, and you see a lot of orange, but 26 states. It was higher just a few days ago. We were at 38 states. 26 states heading in the wrong direction, meaning their new cases in the past week are higher this week than they were a week ago. 26 states in orange on the map heading up. 20 states holding steady, including, importantly, the state of Florida and the state of California. They have been 2 states on the leading edge, if you will, of this summer surge. Now we have 4 states going down. That includes Arizona. Again, good news in Arizona. Still a stubborn case count, but heading down after several troubled weeks there. Let's hope that continues. 26 states going up. If you look at the new cases, this is the troublesome part of the summer surge. A flat line from March, in April, May, into early June. Now we go up, and here's the question on Wednesday, right? This is a 7-day moving average of cases. It has been troubling in recent days, 7-day average. You see that? Will it plateau? Will it plateau, and can we at least flatten and plateau at around 60,000 and then start to shove it down? That is the challenge of the next few days as we watch the case count. The top 5 states, California, Florida, Texas, Arizona, and Georgia. California way ahead of the other states. Florida not too far behind. You see Arizona still in the top 5, even though its case is now going down compared to last week. That tells you how tough the summer has been for the state of Arizona. California now has the dubious distinction of being the state with the most confirmed cases in the United States, just passing the state of New York. And you see how it played out. Back in June, on June 1st, shy of 115,000 confirmed infections in California. Now approaching 410,000 as of yesterday. That number likely to pass 410,000 today. You see the steady climb in the state of California. 2 different paths these 2 states took. New York went up fast. Remember, back in March and April. Now it has plateaued. California was down for a long time, but now in the Los Angeles area, the case count driving it up. California, one of the summer surge examples, but there are many, leading the nation's top infectious disease expert, Anthony Fauci, to say just a short time ago, this fight, don't think of it as being anywhere near over. It is very much in the beginning.
We are certainly not at the end of the game. I'm not even sure we're halfway through. We are living right now through a historic pandemic outbreak. And we are right now in a situation where we do not see any particular end in sight.
Joining us now is Dr. Amy Compton-Phillips. She's the Chief Clinical Officer for Providence St. Joseph Health. Doctor, thank you so much for being with us. When you listen to Dr. Fauci, when you see the case counts, I have been proven wrong before, but you try to be an optimist when you see that maybe that summer surge is starting to plateau a little bit. Where do you see the country right now?
Where I see the country right now is exactly what Dr. Fauci was talking about, is maybe we're at the end of the beginning, I hope, of this surge. The fact that now the president is saying we need universal masking is hugely helpful, because that is the best tool we have to actually get things under control, stop particularly that asymptomatic spread that we know is driving so much of this.
Okay. And so I just want to look through some of the stats and get your input. First, just the positivity trend in the United States right now. And if you watch this, we are doing more testing. And you see from May, it starts to dip down, meaning the percent of the tests coming back positive. That's a good thing. That means there's less spread in your community. Now the national average up around 8%. But I want to take you inside just the state of Florida. If you had a national average of 8%, now let's look at Florida. It was 3.5% in May. 10.5% coming back positive in June, now approaching 20% in July. Explain why that is so important, and in the case of the 18.7%, so troubling.
So the way I think about it is it's a lot like if you had cancer. If you had a tumor and we cut the tumor out, we always look at the margins. We always look at the cells left behind, right? So if you had a tumor taken out and 0% of the margins had cancer cells in it, you know you got the whole thing. You've got it under control. If, on the other hand, 18.7% of the edges of that tumor had cancer cells in it, you know that that cancer had escaped and it was at risk for metastasizing around the body. And that's exactly what happens with the coronavirus. If we're not containing it, if we're not actually capturing all the cases, we know that it's out there and it's spreading further.
And so you mentioned masking. I just want to do a little, well, we'll have the conversation about what it's about on the other side. First, let's go back. This is the president back in April. Listen.
They're not mandatory guidelines. They're guidelines. They suggest you could wear them. You don't have to wear them. But basically, it's a voluntary thing.
The voluntary thing was then, and this is now, just yesterday, a very different message from the President of the United States.
When you get to 6 or 7 days, that kind of really mitigates against getting a good... Just wear a mask, get a mask. Whether you like the mask or not, they have an impact, they'll have an effect, and we need everything we can get.
Apologies for the Fauci in the middle there, but the president there, he's reading from notes, so some people will say, does he really mean it? But at least he finally stood at the podium and said, why is that so important?
It's so important because of the fact that many people are able to spread the virus without realizing they have it, that they have 0 symptoms or they haven't developed symptoms yet. And because of that, because people simply don't know that they can be spreaders, they're not taking the normal precautions, right? So that if you wear the mask, we can dramatically interrupt, particularly the super spreading events that we know drive a huge percentage of the increased case counts. And by the way, I never object to hearing Dr. Fauci, so that didn't bother me one bit.
I appreciate that. It was a little technical issue on our part, but I appreciate your patience with it. I want to show, I use this because, again, I showed you the numbers, the national numbers right now, and there's the potential for a plateau, up around 60,000 cases a week. That's not so great, but there's a potential for the plateau. But I just want to show this comparison to our viewers, the United States versus the European Union, because the European Union went up the hill before the United States. Then it came down, you see, and it has stayed down. It has kept not only flattened the curve, but stayed at a low case level. The United States had a plateau through May and early June there, and then bam, back up. Why? Why is it so different? Roughly the same population. I know we have a different political system, obviously, but why is it so different?
It can be worn on the shoulders. There's a few things that the European Union did differently, and one is that they had very consistent, coherent messaging, that they led with the science, and that they didn't politicize the implications of what we need to do to control. They also paced out their reopening on the data rather than on saying that we have to reopen, full damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead kind of concept. And so I think that the fact that they had a little more cohesion around let's let the data drive what we're doing rather than work off of hope that they had a better outcome.
Hope. Good word. Dr. Amy Compton-Phillips, as always, appreciate your expertise and your insights and your time today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
appreciate you going out of your way for us, Sam. I just don't get it, though. How in the hell did you get here so quickly?
Regardless of who wins the election in November, a record will be broken. Either 74-year-old Donald Trump will become the oldest second-term president in U.S. history, or 77-year-old Joe Biden will be the oldest first-term president. And questions of age, health, and most notably cognition have started to emerge.
If I may, sir, respectfully, in the Fox poll, they asked people who is more competent, whose mind is sounder. Biden beats you in that.
Well, I tell you what, let's take a test. Let's take a test right now. Let's go down. Joe and I will take a test. Let him take the same test that I took, but I guarantee you that Joe Biden could not answer those questions.
I've been tested and I'm constantly tested. Look, all I got to do is watch me, and I can hardly wait to compare my cognitive capability to the cognitive capability of the man I'm running against.
Biden's advisors say he was referring to the everyday rigors of being on the campaign trail. But according to researchers, it is true that the average person's acquired skills, memory, and knowledge, known collectively as crystallized abilities, tend to improve until we're about 60 years old, and then plateau till about age 80. But they also caution to not read too much into age alone.
I don't think it's responsible or entirely factual to just use age as a decision point on whether or not someone has a true cognitive impairment.
And of course, neither candidate is your average person. Americans have seen these two candidates age, not just over the last several years, but over the last several decades, watching their careers play out on the national stage.
Campaigning for Eric Tabor.
The first time that I've been involved in a convention.
Got to bounce that ball.
TV star. I never thought this was going to happen.
But lately, these are the moments that are getting a lot of attention.
No collusion, no obstruction. I hope they now go and take a look at the oranges of the investigation.
We tried it in Iraq. It's not working, so now we're going to try. I mean, in Iran. Excuse me. We tried in Ukraine.
We've performed 1.87 million tests to date, so that's 1,870,000 million tests.
All men and women created by go. You know the thing.
It is true that everyone's sharpness changes a bit day to day. Could be a poor night's sleep, being distracted, low blood sugar, dehydration.
It's very dangerous to overinterpret mental slips when you see it in an older person. We know that there are many factors that affect our mental acuity. They may look like they're not functioning as well cognitively, but they may be perfectly normal.
And as much as we think we know them, to diagnose a true cognitive problem is quite challenging, even for a professional.
The way that a physician makes a clinical diagnosis is to have a clinical relationship, is to do a very comprehensive medical workup, to order specific imaging, brain imaging when needed, and then order specific cognitive assessments, a more elaborate battery of cognitive tests in order to really have any degree of accuracy.
So then, what do we really know about Donald Trump and Joe Biden's health? Based on the medical records released by the White House, President Trump is on a statin medication to manage his cholesterol. He is clinically obese. In 2018, the White House said Trump scored a 30 out of 30 on the Montreal Cognitive Assessment, which doctors use to screen for mild cognitive dysfunction. That same year, White House records indicate the president underwent a coronary calcium CT scan and scored 133, indicating that plaque is present and that he has a common form of heart disease. This past December, Biden released a summary of his medical history, which noted that he also takes a statin to lower his cholesterol and triglyceride levels, and he also takes Eliquis to prevent blood clots. He has an irregular heart rhythm known as non-valvular atrial fibrillation, or AFib, and he is of normal weight. Most notably, in 1988, Biden suffered a brain bleed due to a ruptured cerebral aneurysm and underwent 2 separate brain operations. His doctors say he hasn't had any recurrence of aneurysm since.
I I got hospitalized years ago with a cranial aneurysm. I was hospitalized a couple times. They took the top of my head off the second time and said they couldn't find a brain the first time.
It's worth remembering there is no requirement for a presidential candidate to release any of their medical history, so we may never have a complete picture of their overall physical and cognitive health. It's the campaign itself that is the ultimate test, leaving the voters to decide whether or not age really matters.
Even if it's in the most powerful position in the land, what I would say is you have to pick the best person for the job.
So, Ed Snowden, a lot of people in this country are probably curious, when was the last time you had substantive discussions about coming home to the United States, and would this still be your preference? Do you still refer to it as home?
The United States will always, and I'll always be willing to come back on a single condition, and I've been quite clear about this over the years. This is that the government guarantee that I have the right, and every whistleblower has the right, to tell the jury why they did what they did. Right? We can disagree about whether this was right or wrong. We can disagree about whether this is good or bad. We can disagree about whether this is legal or illegal. That's right and proper in a democracy. But we have to agree that the jury is supposed to be the proper authority to ultimately decide, was this right or wrong? And I hate to say it, but under current laws, that is explicitly forbidden under the Espionage Act, which, as you know, it's increasingly being used against the sources of journalism instead of foreign spies. The law makes no distinction between someone who tells a secret to a journalist and someone who tells a secret to a foreign government. So, yeah.
Today,
You've got the idea. Find your domain at GoDaddy.com.
We are learning more about how Donald Trump reportedly instructed the U.S. ambassador to the United Kingdom, Woody Johnson, to steer the lucrative British Open golf tournament to Trump's resort in Turnberry, Scotland. A former State Department official tells NBC News that the ambassador's deputy twice told Johnson not to make the request because it would be unethical, but that Johnson raised the issue with the British official responsible for Scotland during a 2018 meeting anyway. The British Golf Association had already decided against that. A White House official told NBC News that Trump had never spoken to Johnson about such a request. First reported by the New York Times. Apparently, it's not the first time that Trump has recommended his overseas properties. Last September, Trump reportedly suggested that the vice president stay at his hotel in Doonbeg, Ireland. The reported detour cost the American taxpayers nearly $600,000. David Fahrenthold, Washington Post political reporter, and David K. Johnston, co-founder of DCReport.org. And David Fahrenthold, I'm going to go to you first. Donald Trump has visited his 27 properties that he owns outright, not the licensee ones, but the ones that he owns. And he's been in office, since he's been in office, he's visited 14 of them. We'll put them up on screen, including, of course, Mar-a-Lago, where he goes often and charges $200,000 to be there. Do you have a sense of how much money that he's made off of being president so far?
Well, we have a guess. I should say that the U.S. government has not released a lot of the documents we've been seeking, so our records are pretty incomplete. But if you look just at what taxpayers have paid him, it's $970,000 at least. And if you look at what Republican committees in his own campaign have paid him, so when he travels to his properties and holds a campaign event there, using his presidential time, he gets paid by the government and by the campaigns. Campaigns have spent another $8+ million at his property. So that's all money that he wouldn't have gotten if he had kept his promise and separated himself truly from his business.
Yeah, but then he wouldn't have been doing what he came in to do, right? I mean, David K. Johnston, there's a sense that Donald Trump admires kind of the way that, Vladimir Putin can do business, and one assumes it's just a kleptocracy where, oil gets sold and he gets a cut, and you just assume that is the way that government runs, and that he seems to admire that kind of government. But he's also openly taking foreign money in these businesses. He's under a lawsuit right now because you have the governments of Bahrain, the governments of Saudi Arabia, et cetera, staying in his hotels, and every time they swipe their black cards, they're paying the Trump family. Your thoughts on the way that he's managed to rake it in as president?
Well, Joy, if you or David or I go on a reporting trip and we find, say, a lamp we'd like to buy for our living room, We know you don't put that on your expense account. Donald doesn't think that way. There is no separation in his about what's the business, what's the government. It's all him. And that is why he sees nothing wrong at all with what I think are very clear violations of the Emoluments Clause with the money he is receiving through the businesses from foreign governments. And these aren't foreign governments that are casually stopping by and having a cup of coffee somewhere. Some of these governments have rented out entire floors of the Trump Hotel near the White House.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list.
One of my biggest insecurities has always been the misalignment of my two front teeth.
More than ever?
Let me show you how to create an amazing ad using stock footage. Go to artgrid.io.
Thanks to the coronavirus, the big debate right now is, well, two things. One,
is elbow kissing considered cheating? And 2, how do you reopen schools? How can you get kids learning again, but keep them and their teachers safe? Because kids may not be badly affected by coronavirus, but teachers easily could be. And a lot of people don't know this, but teachers have families of their own. Yeah, it's true. Mrs. Nicholson didn't sleep in the classroom at night. She had a house and everything. So because of this, schools are trying to come up with different solutions. Some of them have decided to have outdoor classes, but that means that all the pale kids are going to fail. New York City has announced it will only have kids come into class 1 to 3 days a week, like an ear, nose, throat specialist. But then the question is, what are parents supposed to do on the days when their kids are at home? And some schools in America have decided that they're just going to throw kids into the classroom and hope for the best.
Heads up, Sam.
Sort of like the Hunger Games, except instead of money, you get no grandparents. Now, President Trump has demanded that all schools open up as normal. And he's even threatening to withhold federal funding from schools that refuse. So just so we're on the same page, he won't touch the police, but he'll defund the shit out of schools. Like, let's agree on that. Everybody wants schools to reopen. The question is, can it be done safely? And the problem is, it doesn't seem like the federal government knows how to make that happen. For instance, here's Betsy DeVos, Secretary of Education and your new stepmom who immediately sent you to fat camp, trying to explain the administration's plan.
What are experts telling you about the appropriate level of transmission for a school before it has to shut down?
Well, I know that that's an area that the CDC is helping to provide further insight into. I can't, as a non-physician or a non-medical expert, tell you precisely what to do in the case of one child in a classroom or 5 children in a classroom to be able to.
So just to be clear, are you saying that areas where there is a flare-up, that schools should revert to remote learning?
I'm saying that schools should have plans.
Like, I truly don't understand how there's bailouts for airlines, free money for the banks, but when it comes to schools, they're just like, here's a can of Lysol, good luck. I'll be honest, at this point, I don't understand why anybody is a teacher in America. You're underpaid, you're overworked, you have to deal with school shootings, and now this? Like, I don't know, maybe Betsy DeVos's master plan is to just hope that the school shooters kill the coronavirus and the problems just cancel each other out. Because I don't understand what else she's thinking. America can't just open schools because other countries have opened schools. Those countries got coronavirus under control first. One comes because of the other. It's like when I was growing up, I really wanted.
Thank you so much. Our med team should have no trouble patching him up now. You're a lifesaver. I can't believe how fast you were. Hey, watch yourself out there. You're ashamed to lose someone with your skills. Wasn't an accident, by the way. It was an attack. Someone slipped explosives into a parcel we processed. Separatist assholes think this land is theirs for the taking. They may be right. Any one of us could have handled that package. Fuck me. We have to be more careful. Beef up our security. At least we didn't lose anyone this time. Thank you, Sam. Really. I hear the chiral network is coming along. You think the signal's strong enough to reach us here? I hope so. Give it a try. Huh? run into any more trouble, we can get the word out sooner. I can't thank you enough.
All right, Sam. There aren't any more stops to make before Mountain Knot City. But this last leg will be the hardest yet. Rest up at the private room and check your gear before you set out.
Amelie!
Higgs and his people came. They finally reached Edge Knot City. There's no escape for me now. Everyone's dead, the city's destroyed, and what's left is crawling with BTs. They're everywhere.
Where's your Kipu?
But I was able to sneak away and reach out to you. This might be our last chance to talk like this. I just wanted you to know that I'm safe. For now. Promise me you'll keep building the chiral network. It's our only hope for the future. It's my only hope for freedom. And when you've finished, we can go back east together.
Amelie, your Kipu, where is it?
Sam, I'll be waiting for you on the beach.
Sam, I have some new info you should hear. Recently recovered thanks to your efforts to expand the chiral network. It concerns BBs. I dug this up on my own, just to be clear. No one ordered me to look. And if anyone asked, put it all on me. No need for you to deal with any blowback. You were just listening to me ramble on the wire, okay? Anyway, it looks like Bridges wasn't the first to bring back BB tech. It was a group of separatists. Terrorists opposed to UCA expansion, according to the records. They started using them about 3 years ago. Right around the time Bridges 1 was putting plans in place to head west. Seems these separatists were having trouble with BTs too, and figured that if they could track them, they might be able to steer them into our path. When Bridges caught wind of this, the decision was made to fight fire with fire, to start using BBs as a countermeasure. It's possible yours was commissioned for that very purpose, a fact I think someone may have tried to conceal, judging by the absence of BB-28's service record. I always found it strange that we were so willing to utilize technology we barely understood. Now we know why. We've been aping methods and techniques employed by others from the start. There's more you should know. It's about the original Bridge Baby experiments. Piecing together what little I could find, it looks like they started around the time of the Death Stranding. They were conducted on the island of Manhattan off the East Coast, which was completely and utterly obliterated by what was almost certainly a void out. Back then, these experiments had the full support and approval of the American government. It's all just guesswork, but I suspect the BB program was conceived to help gain a better understanding of the nature of the Death Stranding. However, due to ethical and safety concerns, public opinion was strongly against the program. Still, they pressed on, and in their desperation to make sense of the greatest disaster of their age, I think they caused another. I should also mention that the president himself was killed in the blast. It was after his death, when he was succeeded by then Vice President Strand, that the experiments were suspended by executive decree. Documents were shredded, facilities were decommissioned, and every effort was made to pretend that BBs had never even existed. Which begs the question how some random separatist group was capable of resurrecting the tech decades later. I'll let you know if I turn up anything enlightening.
Sam, check the delivery terminal and review the list of orders.